Today we're going to start out by looking at some prefixes and suffixes and what happens when you add those to the beginning or end of a word. So we know that the prefix dis will be added to the beginning of a word because it's called a prefix. The suffixes y and less will be added to the end of a base word because that's what a suffix does. So let's look at our first three words. The first word is mush, is our base word. But when we add the suffix y, it becomes mushy, like a mushy mud pie. Then our next base word is care. When we add the suffix less onto the end of it, it changes the meaning and it makes it the opposite of. So instead of care, now we have careless. Then the last word, our last base word, is loyal. And when we add the prefix dis onto the beginning of that word, it makes it also the opposite of, or without. So that becomes disloyal. So what do each of those suffixes and prefixes mean? When we look at the first one, when we add a y as a suffix onto the end of a word, it's having or like something. So mush plus that y becomes mushy. Bounce, we have to take the e away and add the y, and it becomes bouncy. So that means it has a little bounce to it. When we look at the suffix less, that means without. So care plus less equals careless, which means it was done without care. Penniless, we actually change the y to an I when we add the less at the end, and it becomes penniless, means without pennies. Without money would be another way to describe that word. Then we look at the prefix dis. This is added to the beginning of a word. It means apart or away, not, absence of, or to do the opposite of. So when we add dis to the word respect, we have disrespect. It means the opposite of respect. Or dis to loyal, it's the opposite of loyal, so it becomes disloyal. Now I want you to look at the prefix dis and the suffix less and see if you can figure out what new words each of these is making on this sheet. If you want to write it down, you can, or if you just want to think it out loud, but you may want to pause the video to take a minute to really look through this and try it out. So dis plus honest would equal, now you try it on your own. Hope you did a good job on that. You never know when you're going to see these prefixes and suffixes, so it's great to learn about them so you can decode words as you're reading. Now that we've talked about the structure of words, we're going to talk about the structure of the text. The structure of the text is called the text structure. Go figure, right? This is the way that information is organized within the text. Authors organize information in different ways. Depends on their purpose and the ideas that they want to present. We're going to look at an anchor chart to see how text structure is organized in some nonfiction texts. When you look at these 4 different ways that authors can structure their text, you can see that they're also organized by the author's purpose and what the author is trying to convey through their writing. We're going to focus in on the sequence box of this text structure anchor chart. I want you to look at that box. Put your finger on it even if you need to help you to see it a little bit better. When authors use a sequence text structure, their purpose is to show how one event leads to the next. It can indicate time order or steps in a process. Texts that describe historical events use a sequence text structure often to tell about the events in the order that they happened. We learned about a word in when we were talking about memoirs, the word chronological, and that word means it happens in order. So sequence reminds me of that word chronological order. It happens in the sequence that it's supposed to happen. There are also some signal words that are also called transition words, like before, first, next, then, last, and after. Those signal that something's going to come either before, next, or after in the order of the text that it's happening. Also, you may see dates and times, and those dates and times will give you a clue of the sequence of events. We're going to put all that information into use by reading the story, The U.S. Constitution. You can look in your My Book on page 230, and that will be the beginning of this book. If you haven't read this story already, I want you to read through this story, pause the video, and take a couple of minutes to do that. Because we're going to be just digging into this story a little bit and not necessarily reading every single word. Okay, so you should have read this story by the time that we're at this point. We don't want any spoilers as we read. So make sure that you've paused it and read the story if you haven't done that at this point. If you have done that, then I want you to turn in your My Book to page 234. These are these purple pages right here. I want you to look at paragraphs 5 and 6. You can see the numbers next to the paragraphs tell you which ones that you're going to read. And we're going to read those and look at the text structure of what we're reading. So it says, who wrote the Constitution? In May 1787, delegates from most of the 13 states met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Their job was to write the Constitution, a new set of rules for the country's government. The meeting was called the Constitutional Convention. The 55 delegates at the meeting later became known as the framers of the Constitution. So let's look at the structure of those two paragraphs. Thinking back to the anchor chart that we saw, is this comparing or contrasting anything? I don't think so. I don't see anything being compared from one thing to another. Is this cause and effect? No, I don't think so either. I don't believe that this has something to explain what happened and why it happened. Is this in a sequence? Yes, this is happening in a sequence. It gives us a date to know what happened first, and then I bet if we kept reading, we would see other things happening in order, going in chronological order, starting with that May 1787 date. Also, if we look ahead, or actually behind, we can look right here on page 233, and we can see that it talks about after the Revolutionary War. After is a transition word that tells us that something's happening in a sequence. So the text structure of this story is going to be sequencing. Why do you think that the author used the text structure of sequence in this story? I kind of feel like it helps us to understand a time frame of when things are happening. The author wants to explain to us that the events in planning the new government took place in a certain order. As you're reading the rest of the story, if you haven't already, you should annotate on the side in your My Book. You could underline the dates, those transition and sequence words, and any phrases that you notice that fit with the structure of the text. So now it's your turn. You're going to write a paragraph explaining how the Constitution was created. You have pages 233 to 235 in your My Book to help you. You'll want to use the same text structure of sequencing when you write your paragraph, and you might even want to include a timeline as a graphic feature. Good luck! I hope you have fun writing about the Constitution, and do your personal best as always.